Well, this is the canvas that Raymond Crawford presented, and it's a top view of pumpkins and gourds. Now, there's lots of wonderful places here for decorative stitches, as you can see. But the challenge is, how are we going to bring the top piece, the little stem end, how can that be higher than the pumpkin? And I did resolve it, and I will show you that in a little bit, but I'm enough an actress to hold that for the second act. So there's another problem that stitchers sometimes face, and that is working with circles or working with curves. So when the artist gives us a straight line like this to do continental or basket weave, man, that's really easy. We just follow along, the stitches line up like little soldiers, interesting and fun to do. But give us a circle, and especially if you have not a lot of experience outlining, then you are finding yourself with this beautiful delicate line on this side, and at the bottom, at the 5 o'clock side, also delicate little line. And then here you have these little spokes. And if this were a balloon, that would look like the air could release from that. So the most common mistake is we add extra stitches on those two wobbly sides, and unfortunately our circle suddenly becomes an oval rather than it reads as an oval. So the stitch I'm about to show you can work for those circly things very well. And if it's not a circle, it could be a wavy stitch, which is really just a partial circle if you think about it. So climbing the mountain is where you run into trouble, just like you got into trouble up here, climbing up. That's where the stitches are single stitches, but they read much more delicate. And so we feel like we have to push in an additional stitch in this spot. Then we slide down the mountain and those stitches line up. If we hit the flat, then it's just like our basket work or continental that was there. So again, if something occurs on your canvas that has this wobbly look, the hemline of a jacket, the hemline of a skirt, the hemline of a drapery, perhaps on a Christmas stocking. The stitch I'm about to share with you and give you details on works extremely well for that. Many of you already may be familiar with the stitch, but just in case it's new to you, this would be good. And I'm going to show you how to do it a little bit differently than perhaps like you did with chain stitch. Chain stitch was less controlled, and this one is very controlled. Okay, so let me just go through this with you. I'm going to move this slightly to the side so you can see more of my hands. I'm working on a 13 mesh canvas. And how do we start? Well, we start with an upright gobelin. That's something new. Generally speaking, in the past, we began with a crazy daisy stitch, but that became really bulky and often didn't give the delicate that we want at the beginning. So we're going to do an upright gobelin, and I usually over 2 canvas threads, 3 holes. Now you can make your loops after that as long as you want. Generally speaking, if you only went over 1 canvas thread, then the braid stitch is far too tight. And if you go over like 4 or 5 canvas threads, that's huge. So you should be doing that with a very huge thread. I'm this evening working with the pearl cotton. So I chose to only go 2 canvas threads below what I just put down. And I'm going to slide under that stitch that I did to start, that beginning stitch. Let me get that tighter. And then I'm going to go right back into the hole that I first came up in. Blink. And when I do that, it forms this little, almost like a crazy daisy with a long prong. 2 canvas threads down. Slide under that little loop and head to the back. The nice thing about this stitch, girls, is that if you are working on a frame, you don't have to keep turning your canvas over. Everything is on the top surface, and you have tremendous control of how long those little loops can be. Up, slide under. Now, I told you earlier what happens if there is a curve going on. Okay, let's give ourselves a little curve. Now this would be maybe a place where I would only skip over one canvas thread to establish the curve, but my area here is large enough. I still can go the 2, but I slid over by 1. So I'm beginning to curve down. And see how nice that outline is working? And if I had done it in Continental, it would be much more ragged looking.
Diapers on her. I'd rather not have to do that. So I'm glad we have some, we can try a higher dose and hopefully
I see someone is still unmuted. Okay, and when I'm going to pretend that I have the last one in. I'm just going to come up, go underneath, and to the back, and I'm finished with that chain. Now let's see if you have any questions for me about this so far. They're all bright. No questions? Are you awake?
Oh, we have a mute. We're muted. We're muted.
Okay. No, but I'm just asking if anybody wants to unmute and find out if any questions answered, then I'm here. Now, we're not quite done yet because we can still decorate this guy. Let's say this line seems too thick for our purposes. We can come back in at the top of that gobelin. And, whoops. I thought I was all prepared, didn't have that knot ready. Okay, we're going to come up at that gobelin again. And this time we're going to wrap underneath that stick and underneath the next circle. And if you did this with a thread that was perhaps sparkly, this would have a very Renaissance appearance to it. Or if you're doing a little candy cane on a Santa, or Elf is carrying the candy cane, those are always so tough to get some dimension. You could do it this way. See how pretty that is? Now I have one that I did earlier, and I did it with pearl cotton, but I in fact did do some metallic thread on it. Let's do that close up so you can really see. See? There's a little bit of twinkle there. So again, that would be lovely, separating the name from the stocking perhaps, or again, a hemline of a coat. You could almost do a whole coat that way. And by the way, this stitch works wonderfully well for hair. So if you have a character that you don't want to do random encroaching gobelin, then this is a nice stitch to give almost a little twisted look to it. And what you see in the green here, it's transporting itself to be black, but this was done actually with silk ribbon, 7mm silk ribbon. And in fact here, you could add a bead in the center of each of these, and again, it looks very much like a finished braid that might be around a pillow, for an example. So this works really well. And braid stitch really comes to us not from crewel embroidery, although people did do a lot of chaining in crewel embroidery. The braid stitch comes to us from silk ribbon embroidery. And the embroideresses that it was very popular in England, and so some of the best silk ribbon product was from England. The best books are written in England about it. So that's the little chain stitch, and again, or braid. And now you know how to make circles easily on a canvas. So I didn't show you that, but you get the idea. You can make a curve, so therefore you can make a circle as well. Any questions? I'm open for questions.
Yes, I have a question. So when you're wrapping like that, what holes are you coming up in? Are you coming in right in the center in the same holes you were using, or are you coming in?
No, the wrap, are you speaking of the wrapping I'm doing?
Yeah, when you're wrapping, which holes are you using?
I'm only using the little loops, sweetie. Only the loops.
Oh,
I'm
so
not going to the back side
at all. Okay.
No, everything's on top surface with this one. So I'm just merely sliding underneath those two little parts of the loop here. See if I can, like that. And nothing's on the back. It's all looped over that chain that I just put down.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Can you show me again how you did the curve?
Sure.
How you went over?
Yeah. I'm actually just sliding over 2 canvas threads at a slight diagonal, and that's what's causing it to curve. Let me show you that here. So I'm going to start up, gotta get lined up here. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and now I'm going to come right underneath 2 canvas threads. I'm on the straight so far.
Yeah.
Slide underneath that goblin, push down. Now, if I want to make it start to curve, I don't want to come right underneath like this because that's the straight. I'm going to jump over 1 canvas thread slightly to the left and then slide under. And you're hardly aware of it because it still looks like it's still on the straight.
Okay, I gotcha.
And then to get to the next curve, I'm going to, again, this was, if I was straight, I'm just going to slide over to 1 extra canvas thread and slip under.
Just to your left, right? Each time you
Just to my left, because I'm curving this way. If I were curving the other way, it would be to the
go
right.
to the right. Okay.
Just slipping along.
So
this
Linda
was 1,
says
2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then over by 1 and slide under. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Does that make it clear to you?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Now I want to show you the end result of some of that work. As I said, Linda gave me the challenge of this canvas. How was I going to do the stem ends on these pumpkins, because we are looking down at them, and if I did decorative stitches here, I had to make sure that this little guy, this guy particularly, needs to come way far forward. So after thinking about it for a bit, I decided that the best bet would probably be the chain stitch. It's just right for us here. Okay. So what you're looking at is the chain stitch on this great big red guy here is this, and you can see how much that lifts up. The shadow line is done with just Continental, but this is done with 2 colors, a lighter beigey color and the beige that I was stitching with earlier. And you notice how tightly the rows are bouncing against each other, and that gives that extra lift because the decorative stitch here is pretty powerful, and I didn't want it to dominate. I want those little ends to still rise up. I'm very particular about foreground, middle ground, and background. Those of you that have classes with me recall that I often choose a delicate stitch for behind, maybe even very thin threads, and then as we work closer to the piece, then to us, I make the stitches bigger, and when it's way in front, it needs to dominate, and that, I think, is what happens here. This guy is way far forward. Even physically, if you look across a horizon on it, this lifts up more than this stitch does. So that's really excellent use of chain stitch, and what I hope you'll be able to do.